My name is Emily, and for most of my life, I thought family meant loyalty, protection, and unconditional love. I thought no matter what happened, my parents would be my safe place. But looking back now, I realize I was just fooling myself. I grew up in a suburban home where appearances mattered more than truth. My father, Richard, built his reputation on success and hard work, though behind closed doors, he was cold and controlling. My mother, Patricia, was the kind of woman who smiled sweetly in public but never missed a chance to compare me to my younger brother. And then there was Daniel, my brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, even when he wrecked cars, dropped out of college twice, and blew through money like it was nothing. He was always their favorite. Me, I was the quiet one, the one who stayed up late studying, who helped my grandmother with groceries, who put herself through school and became a counselor. I never asked for much. Maybe that was my mistake. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that love isn't measured in money or gifts, but deep down, I knew I'd always been second place. It hurt, but I swallowed it because I didn't want to believe my parents were capable of anything worse than favoritism. Until the day I learned the truth. The truth that they had cut me out of their will, completely. Erased me as if I never existed in this family. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding, that maybe I had misheard something, or maybe someone was exaggerating. But no, it was real. And what came after that realization would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Because when they erased me, they had no idea what secret I was about to uncover. And they had no idea that their betrayal would lead to their own downfall. But I didn't realize that was just the beginning of the nightmare. It all started at a Sunday dinner. We didn't gather as much as we used to, but when we did, my mother made a big production of it. The fancy china, the crystal glasses, a roast that could feed twice the people at the table. All for show, of course. Daniel and Melissa walked in late, as usual, laughing loudly like they owned the place. Melissa always had this air about her, like she was auditioning for a role no one gave her. Perfect hair, perfect nails, that fake sweet smile she put on for my parents, but never for me. Dinner went as it usually did. My parents asking Daniel about his new business venture and nodding along as if he hadn't failed the last three. I sat there quietly, sipping wine, pushing food around my plate, pretending not to notice the way my father avoided asking about my job, my life, anything about me. And then Melissa said it. She leaned back in her chair, swirled her wine, and with a smirk, she said, "Well, at least now Daniel and I don't have to worry about anything in the future. It feels good knowing everything's secured, doesn't it, Patricia?" The room went still for a moment. My mother gave her this approving little smile, and my father cleared his throat. "What do you mean?" I asked, my fork pausing midair. Melissa tilted her head, pretending she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "Oh, nothing. Just that it's nice when parents make sure their children are taken care of properly." Her eyes flicked toward me, and that smirk deepened. I felt my stomach twist. Something wasn't right. I looked at my parents, but neither of them met my gaze. My mother busied herself cutting into her roast, and my father launched into some story about the housing market. But the air was heavy, charged. Melissa's words weren't casual. She wanted me to hear them. She wanted me to know something. And in that moment, I realized whatever secret they were keeping, it was big. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake replaying her words over and over, feeling a pit of dread in my stomach. Something told me I wasn't going to like what I found out. The very next morning, I drove over to my parents' house. I couldn't shake Melissa's smug little grin out of my head. I knew her too well. She never said anything by accident. My mother opened the door, surprised to see me. "Emily, what are you doing here so early?"
I need to talk, I said, pushing past her into the living room. My voice was sharper than I intended, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. My father was sitting in his leather chair, glasses on, reading the paper like it was any other day. He asked what this was about without looking up. I stood there, staring at both of them. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father folded his paper slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. Finally, he looked at me and said flatly, "She was referring to the will." My chest tightened. "The will?" I said. He nodded once. "We updated it recently." I felt the blood drain from my face. "And what does that mean?" My mother sighed like this was all too exhausting for her. "Emily, you're doing fine. You have a stable career, no debts, no children to support. Daniel, on the other hand, he needs the help. He's starting a family. He's trying to build something. It only makes sense." I stared at her in disbelief. "So, you cut me out completely?" Silence was the answer. My father finally said, "You'll be fine. You've always been fine. Daniel needs this more than you do. It's not personal." Not personal? I wanted to scream. My own parents had erased me from their legacy like I was nothing. Like all the years I spent being the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything, didn't matter. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking. "So, I don't matter. That's what you're saying?" Neither of them looked at me. My mother fiddled with the hem of her sweater. My father picked his paper back up. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I walked out of that house knowing one thing for sure. If they wanted to cut me out of their lives, fine. But they had no idea just how much damage I was capable of doing once I stopped protecting them. Because deep down, I knew my family had secrets. And if they wanted war, I was ready to dig them all up.
Not just less than, not just overlooked, erased. I thought back to my childhood, to all the moments that suddenly made too much sense. How my mother would beam at Daniel's C- report card while barely glancing at my straight A's. How my father proudly introduced Daniel as my son, the future businessman, even though Daniel never finished a single project. And me, I was just the reliable one. The one who'd clean up messes, drive Daniel home when he was drunk, sit through my parents' lectures without arguing. I told myself it was love, that they just had different ways of showing it. But sitting there on the floor, I realized it had never been love. It was convenience. I was useful when they needed me, invisible when they didn't. And now they'd made it official. They'd written me out of their future, their legacy, their lives. I cried that night. Not soft tears, but the ugly kind, the kind that rack your chest and make you feel like you'll never breathe again. It wasn't even about the money. It was about what it meant. That my own parents looked at me, their eldest child, and decided I didn't matter. But after the tears came something else. A hard, simmering anger that spread through me like fire. Because if they thought I'd just accept this, if they thought I'd keep being the quiet, obedient daughter while they handed everything to Daniel and Melissa, they were wrong. For the first time in my life, I stopped caring about keeping the peace. And maybe that's why I started remembering things. Little things. Whispers I'd overheard, strange business trips, envelopes of cash that never seemed to add up. I realized I didn't really know the full truth about my family's money. And suddenly, I wanted to know everything. Because if they wanted to play dirty, then I wasn't afraid to dig into the dirt. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what they were hiding. A week passed before I acted. I didn't want to go back to my parents' house, and I couldn't exactly confront Daniel and Melissa without evidence. But
I remembered something. My grandmother's attic. When she passed away a few years ago, my parents cleared out most of her things, but they left boxes of old files and papers up there. My grandmother was meticulous, the kind of woman who kept every receipt and letter neatly stacked in folders. She didn't trust banks, didn't trust lawyers. She trusted paper. So one Saturday morning, I drove out to her old house, the one still sitting empty while my parents decided whether to sell it or rent it. The key was still hidden under the same loose brick on the porch. The air inside was stale, filled with dust and silence. I climbed the creaky wooden stairs up to the attic, my heart racing like I was doing something criminal. The attic was just as I remembered. Boxes stacked high, yellowed curtains, a rocking chair covered in a sheet. I pulled open the first box labeled household and found old bills, bank statements, tax forms. At first, it all seemed ordinary. But then I found a folder tucked inside a box marked Christmas decorations. The handwriting on the label was my grandmother's, but it only said one word: Richard, my father's name. I sat cross-legged on the floor, hands trembling as I opened it. Inside were documents I didn't understand at first: property deeds, business contracts, strange financial statements with offshore bank names I'd never heard of. And then one paper nearly slipped out of my hand. It was a property document, signed under my name, Emily Carter. My name, my social security number. But I had never seen this property, never signed this contract. My heart stopped. What was my father doing with my identity? I flipped through the papers frantically, my stomach churning. The more I read, the clearer it became. My father had used me. He'd signed me onto deals without my knowledge, deals that looked illegal. My throat went dry. This wasn't just shady business. This was fraud. And if he had been doing this for years, then maybe that's why they had cut me out. Maybe erasing me from the will wasn't just favoritism. Maybe it was protection. Protection for themselves. I shoved the papers back into the folder, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. My whole body felt cold. I thought being cut out of the will was the betrayal. But this was something darker. And I knew one thing for sure. My parents weren't just greedy. They were hiding something that could destroy everything. And now I had the proof. I sat there in that dusty attic with the folder spread out in front of me, my pulse hammering in my ears. Each page told a story I didn't want to believe. The property deal with my name on it wasn't the only one. There were at least 3 more, some tied to shell companies, others to vacant lots that looked abandoned on paper but had huge sums of money attached. And all of them carried my name, my social security number, my forged signature. I felt sick. This wasn't just fraud. This was identity theft. My own parent had stolen from me. I tried to piece it together. The offshore accounts, the sudden cash my parents always seemed to have, the way my father could bail out Daniel no matter how reckless he was with money. It wasn't luck. It wasn't success. It was theft and lies. And the worst part, I realized how long this had been going on. Some of the documents were dated over a decade ago, when I was in college working 3 jobs to pay my tuition, eating ramen noodles while my father was secretly using my name to line his pockets. Tears burned my eyes, but this time they weren't out of sadness. They were pure rage. I whispered out loud, "You used me." My voice cracked in the empty attic. "You used me like I was nothing." I shoved the papers back into the folder, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline. Because now I had something they didn't know I had. Proof. Evidence. But I also knew I had to be careful. If my father found out I'd discovered this, he'd find a way to bury it and me with it. I left the house quietly, locking the door behind me, the folder tucked inside my bag. Driving home, my hands were trembling on the wheel, but my mind was racing with one thought. This wasn't just about being cut out of a will anymore. This was about justice. And for the first time in my life, I realized I held the power. What I didn't know then was that Daniel and Melissa weren't just bystanders in all of this. They were part of it too.
And soon, I was going to find out just how deep their betrayal ran. After that day in the attic, I couldn't look at my family the same way. Every memory felt tainted. Every smile I remembered from my parents felt like a lie. But I also knew I couldn't rush. If I confronted them now, they'd deny everything, maybe even find a way to make those papers disappear. So I started watching, quietly, carefully. I began with Daniel. He'd always been reckless, but lately there was something different about him. His new business ventures seemed vague, yet he suddenly had a brand new car, designer suits, and a down payment on a huge house with Melissa. None of it matched up with his track record of failure. One evening, I followed him after he left a bar. He drove to a run-down office building on the edge of town. I sat in my car across the street, heart racing, watching him carry a briefcase inside. He stayed for less than 20 minutes before coming out empty-handed. That same week, Melissa posted a photo online of herself at a luxury spa, champagne in hand, bragging about hard work paying off. I nearly threw my phone across the room. Hard work? She'd never worked a day in her life. The more I watched them, the more I realized Daniel and Melissa weren't just benefiting from my parents' favoritism. They were in on it. They knew about the money, the fraud, the offshore accounts. And the smug look Melissa had given me at dinner, that wasn't just arrogance. That was confidence. She knew the entire empire was already theirs. One night, I overheard something that confirmed my suspicion. I was leaving the grocery store when I spotted them arguing in the parking lot. I ducked behind a row of cars, close enough to catch bits of their fight. Daniel's voice was sharp, angry. "You think she suspects something?" Melissa snapped back. "Even if she does, it doesn't matter. Your parents made sure of that. She's out, we're in. As long as we keep them happy, everything's ours." My stomach twisted. They weren't just part of it. They were manipulating the situation. And my parents were letting them. I drove home that night shaking with fury. They thought they'd won. They thought I was powerless, cut off, forgotten. But what they didn't know was that I had the folder, and I was ready to use it. What I didn't realize yet was just how far Melissa had gone to secure her place in this family. And soon, I'd uncover the truth that made my blood run cold. I couldn't shake the sound of Melissa's voice that night in the parking lot. The way she said it, like she owned my parents, like she had orchestrated the entire thing. So I started paying closer attention to her. Melissa had always been good at playing the perfect daughter-in-law. She flattered my mother relentlessly, brought her little gifts, texted her constantly about recipes or fashion. But beneath that sugary sweetness was something sharper. I saw it now, clear as day. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe just proof that I wasn't imagining things. I walked in and froze when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Melissa and my mother. "You've done the right thing, Patricia," Melissa was saying, her tone low and smooth. "Emily doesn't need this burden. She has her job. She's independent. But Daniel, he's your son. He deserves to carry on Richard's legacy.
And with me by his side, we'll protect everything you and Richard built. My chest burned as I pressed myself against the hallway wall, listening. My mother's voice wavered. I suppose you're right. Emily, she never quite fit in the way Daniel does. Melissa's tone sweetened again. Exactly. You're just doing what's best for your family. And trust me, Daniel and I will make sure you never regret it. I felt sick. Melissa wasn't just complicit. She was the one whispering poison into my mother's ear, twisting her insecurities, making sure I was written out completely. And the worst part, my mother was letting her. She wasn't even fighting for me. I drove away that day knowing something had shifted in me forever. Melissa thought she was clever, that her little act had secured everything. But what she didn't know was that I was about to flip the script. Because I had evidence that could burn their perfect little empire to the ground. And soon, I was going to use it. After hearing that conversation in the kitchen, something inside me hardened. For years, I had let things slide. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that keeping the peace was better than stirring chaos. But not anymore. I went home and laid out everything from the folder on my kitchen table. Contracts, deeds, fake signatures, bank statements. I spent hours cross-checking dates, names, and accounts. The more I pieced it together, the clearer the picture became. My father had built his so-called success on lies, and Daniel and Melissa had been reaping the benefits all along. I bought a scanner and began digitizing everything, file by file, document by document. I created backups on flash drives and stored them in places my family would never think to look. At work, in a safety deposit box, even mailed one to a trusted friend. For the first time, I felt like I had leverage, power. But I knew I couldn't just drop this bomb recklessly. If I went public too soon, they'd spin it as me being jealous or bitter. I had to be strategic. So I started small. I made subtle comments at family dinners, little digs about business dealings or old property files. Each time, I watched my father's jaw tighten, my mother's smile falter, Melissa's eyes narrow. They knew I was onto something. And the tension only made me bolder. One night, Daniel called me out of the blue. His tone was sharp, defensive. "What are you trying to do, Emily? You think Mom and Dad don't tell me when you're snooping around?" I kept my voice calm. "I don't know what you're talking about, Daniel. Maybe you're just nervous." There was a pause on the line. Then he snapped, "Just stay out of it. You don't belong in this family business."
He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. He was rattled. Good. Because the truth was, I hadn't even started yet. The documents in my possession weren't just scraps of paper. They were a weapon. And I was ready to use them to tear down the illusion my family had built for decades. What I didn't know was how quickly things would spiral once I pulled the first thread. And the downfall was going to be uglier than I ever imagined. I waited for the perfect moment. I wanted my family to feel every second of the shock, the betrayal, the weight of what they had done. And when I finally acted, it hit them all at once. I started with the authorities. I delivered copies of the documents I had scanned, highlighting the fraudulent property deals, the offshore accounts, and most damning of all, my father using my identity without consent. They didn't take long to act. Investigations were launched almost immediately, and suddenly my parents' carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Then I went public within the extended family. I called a meeting at my grandmother's old house where it all began for me. I laid out everything. Richard's lies, Patricia's complicity, Daniel and Melissa's manipulation. Every document, every forged signature, every shady deal.
The room went silent. My parents' faces drains of color. Daniel and Melissa's smug confidence evaporated instantly. You did all this? My mother whispered, her voice trembling. I uncovered the truth, I said calmly, holding back the shaking rage in my voice. And now everyone knows it. Daniel stammered, trying to grab the folder, but I pulled it closer. You thought cutting me out would silence me, but it only exposed you. Melissa's face twisted in fury. You'll regret this. You'll ruin all of us. I smiled. No, I didn't ruin you. You ruined yourselves. Legal papers, frozen accounts, and questions from auditors descended upon them like a storm. Patricia's reputation in the community, built on appearances and social grace, began to crumble. Richard's business was investigated for fraud, and Daniel and Melissa were caught in the middle, liable for the very deals they had been complicit in. I watched them falter, helpless to protect themselves. And yes, I felt satisfaction. Not just for myself, but for every year I had been dismissed, overlooked, and erased. But even in the midst of triumph, I felt a pang of something else. Sadness, maybe. Regret. A recognition that the family I had wanted, the one I had hoped could have been loving, was gone forever. Melissa stormed out of the room that day, screaming that I'd crossed the line. Daniel tried to argue with me, but even he knew the truth was undeniable. My parents sat in stunned silence, finally realizing that their choices, their favoritism, their lies, their betrayal had led them here. I didn't gloat. I simply walked away, leaving them with their ruined empire, their debts, their reputations in tatters. I had done what I came to do, but even as I drove home, the weight of what I had set in motion pressed down on me. They thought they could erase me. They thought I would accept my role as the invisible daughter. Instead, they've lost everything. Weeks passed and the dust finally began to settle. The authorities were still untangling the mess, but my part in it was done. I didn't need money or power or revenge beyond seeing the truth exposed. What I wanted most had been achieved. Justice. I didn't attend any more family events. I didn't call or text. My parents were a shadow of themselves. Daniel and Melissa a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. And me? I felt free. I thought freedom would feel lighter, but it carried a weight I hadn't expected. Losing my family, the life I thought I'd have, was painful, but it was also liberating. I no longer had to tiptoe around lies, no longer had to compete for their approval, no longer had to pretend they loved me the way they never did. I started focusing on my life, my work, and the people who truly mattered. Friends, colleagues, and clients who respected me, not my last name or my inheritance. I built a quiet, stable existence, one of my own making. Sometimes, late at night, I think about them, about the parents who once claimed to love me, about the brother who betrayed me, about Melissa's fake smile. I feel anger flare up for a moment, then fade. I've accepted that they are lost to their own choices, and I am not responsible for fixing them. I have nothing from the will. No fortune, no property, no flashy lifestyle. But I have something they can never take. The truth. And the knowledge that I played the hand they dealt me better than they ever could. They thought cutting me out would silence me, erase me, make me powerless. But the irony is beautiful. In trying to destroy me, they destroyed themselves. And for the first time in my life, I feel peace. I survived their betrayal. I survived their lies. And I survived myself. Stronger, wiser, and unshackled. The family that tried to erase me is gone. But I am here. And that is enough.